Mrs. Cecil Frances Alexander was the wife of an Anglican bishop. She wrote the words to a hymn titled, "All Things Bright and Beautiful." You may remember the opening words of that hymn, which are also its refrain. All things bright and beautiful, all things great and small, all things wise and wonderful, our Father made them all. The idea that all things come from a common creator runs through every religious belief system that we know, along with the related idea, not only all things, all people come from a common creator. But one of the lessons we encounter from Mark's gospel today brings us face to face with something else. There are people we find it convenient, if not advantageous, to ignore. Even if we don't actively mistreat them, there are some people we find it easy to disregard. They, like us, come from a common creator. But often we are not found extending them the blessings of God's grace. The lesson we run into today is based on an encounter Jesus had in the region of Tyre in what was then the Roman province of Syria. Tyre is now one of the largest cities in Lebanon. The region of Tyre was along the Mediterranean coastline, so the area was a major commercial trading and shipping point. This was a wealthy place. Aside from the fact that Tyre was a Gentile-dominated place, the place and its people were part of an unpleasant history for Jews. Jezebel, that notoriously cruel and powerful wife of King Ahab, was from the region of Tyre. Ezekiel's prophecy contains a harsh condemnation of the people of Tyre in chapters 26, 27, and 28. Perhaps because the people of Tyre gloated after Judah was conquered and after the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. During the time of Jesus' ministry, relations between the more prosperous Tyrian people and its less wealthy Jewish minority appear to have been strained if they weren't bitter. Despite these realities, Jesus left the Galilee region that was his home base and went to Tyre. He left his home base to visit a place and people whose very mention often triggered a hostile reaction among Jews. And Mark's gospel states that Jesus went to Tyre and entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Maybe the Lord just wanted to get away for some quiet time. Maybe he wanted to have some time with his disciples because he'd been doing some public ministry and he'd been surrounded by multitudes, and maybe he just wanted to have a little retreat time. We don't know why the Lord went to Tyre to get away. We don't know why he was trying to escape notice. We simply know that Mark's gospel records that he was not looking to be seen. But Mark also adds, yet he could not escape notice. A Gentile woman of Syro-Phoenician ancestry somehow learned his ancestry, learned his location, and made her way into his presence and begged him to heal her troubled little girl. She had a little girl, demon-possessed. We may have, in our time, said she had seizures, or maybe she was mentally disturbed, but she was a troubled little girl, and like any mother, I don't care if you want to be left alone or not, you're going to have to see me. You're going to have to see me and hear about my child. Surely she knew about the long animosity between her Gentile ancestry and the Jewish ancestry of Jesus. But somehow she pushed beyond all that history of resentment to make her way into what was probably a Jewish residence and beg a Jewish man to heal her daughter. And Jesus didn't give her what one might consider a gracious first response. I don't care how you read it, how you pause on it. These are not kind and gentle words. Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Of all the sayings of Jesus, I declare that that's one of the ones that you have a little difficulty feeling warm and fuzzy about. Jesus may have been testing her faith by that statement. He may have been simply expressing his belief that the primary target for his ministry was his own Jewish community. He may have been doing something else. But his comment is painful to read, and probably it was even more painful for the woman to hear. She came to Jesus begging for help. His comment suggested that the help she sought was, in his mind, reserved for others, and that she and her daughter were like dogs, unfit to receive what was reserved for members of the Jewish community. Let me be clear. No person should ever be considered unfit to receive help based on their ancestry. And I don't think we should read the words of Jesus to amount to an endorsement of rejecting people's need for help based on the fact they're different. Jesus may have been doing what my law professors used to do. Our law professors used to do, Paul, in the Socratic method. They would push us to try to get us to push back. And in pushing us, it happens in seminary too, Dr. James. In pushing us, the professor brings us to respond in ways that we would not have otherwise responded. We get insights that we would not have otherwise gotten if we'd been given a more comfortable situation. I do not know that to be the case, but that is certainly a possibility that is worth pondering. Whatever the case was, the Syrophoenician woman refused to take offense. And she did not back down. Instead, she pushed back. When Jesus said, "It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs," like any smart-witted mama, she said, "Yeah, but even the dogs on the table eat the crumbs that the children don't eat." That's a mama response. That's a mama response. You're not going to deny my child the blessings of grace by insulting me. I am going to stay here and petition for my child because the crumbs of grace will not be denied my child. For saying that kind of faith got this response from Jesus: "You may go. The demon has left your daughter." One of the gospel writers says, I haven't seen that kind of faith even in Israel. Her faith did not falter when it met an unpleasant or an adverse situation. That persistent faith, that gritty faith, because she had grit. You recall that movie, True Grit? That little girl whose daddy had been murdered by this low-down thief comes to John Wayne's character, Marshal Rooster Cogburn, with his one eye and pot belly, asking him to go hunt down the person who killed him. And Rooster Cogburn doesn't want to go, but she had grit. And she kept at him and at him and at him. That gritty faith is what this Syrophoenician woman had. Gritty faith always makes a saving difference. Gritty faith always makes a saving difference. Life is full of unpleasant realities. Many people allow these unpleasant realities to define their sense of God's power and purpose. This woman could have allowed the history of ethnic animosity between her people and those of Jesus to define her faith in what was possible. She could have taken offense at the painful comment by Jesus and allowed her pain to crush her faith in God's love and power and purpose. But she had gritty faith that was tougher than the unpleasant realities. Her gritty faith made the saving difference for her suffering daughter. I know we say every tub has to sit on its own bottom, but notice that this child didn't pray for herself. It was her mother's gritty faith in the face of Jesus that worked the difference. Yes, we are personally accountable for ourselves. Yes, we must take some responsibility for ourselves. But there is something about the love of God that is activated through vicarious means. I can pray for you, and God can do something. And the converse of that is true. I can refuse to pray for you, and in doing so somehow hinder what you need from God. This woman had gritty faith. Gritty faith in divine justice made the saving difference for the people who fought to abolish slavery, for the people who fought to allow women voting rights, for the people who fought to improve working conditions and pay for laborers. They had gritty faith. They didn't just bow down because they had one or two obstacles, because life is full of unpleasant realities. Gritty faith in divine love makes the difference for people struggling to overcome past mistakes, to live beyond addiction, to live and act with strength in the face of persecution and prejudice and bigotry and discrimination. They have gritty faith. It takes faith to be a Jackie Robinson. It takes faith to be the first. It takes faith to hang in there when you don't feel like it. It takes gritty faith. Gritty faith in divine mercy makes the difference for every day for people struggling with illness and grief and despair. When you don't feel like going for the treatment and you know you got to have the treatment, it takes gritty faith to get up and go and hook up to that machine for dialysis, or hook up for that machine for chemotherapy, or hook up for that machine for rehabilitation. It takes gritty faith. In a world full of unpleasant realities, we need people with gritty faith like this Syrophoenician woman. We need people who won't back down when they face unpleasant realities. We need people who will continue praying and pushing, continue pleading and planning, continue agitating as well as meditating. Yeah, meditate, but agitate some too. Because agitation is part of the gritty faith reality that we have to live through in order to make a saving difference. This sermon also asks us to ponder, who are our Gentiles? Who are the people we find it convenient to ignore? Who are the people we consider unworthy of God's mercy and justice and peace? This lesson exposes the painful truth that religious people can adopt the prejudices and practices of our surrounding culture. We can view and treat some people as Gentiles. And when that happens, we become agents of deprivation rather than agents of liberation. Our Gentiles are the people we force to pass through hoops before they receive the blessings of grace. You know, some people can just walk into our grace. They don't have to have an admission. They don't have to pass any tests. They have to know any secret handshake or passwords. They just can walk up and really get love. And there are some people who, when they show up, we start thinking of ways to say, now why should I have to deal with such and so? They are the people with whom we have issues. They are the people we hope to avoid and may actively shun. They are the Syrophoenicians of our time and place, the people we somehow view and treat as unworthy of God's grace. And like the Syrophoenician woman, they are the people whose gritty faith can often intrude on our desire for uninterrupted living. These Gentiles make us uncomfortable. What do you mean, preacher? Here's some examples. Gentiles include people we consider different due to their social status. They are different because they are poor, or they're different because they're rich, or they're different because they're not our color, or they're different because they're immigrant, or they're different because they're homosexual, or different because they're straight, or different because they are just different. And their difference makes it seem like they're being pushy when they ask to be treated equal, like we want to be treated. You know what? When they ask to be treated like we treated, we feel like they're being pushy. We want them to not push so much and make so much noise because we want them to be out of the way. We're comfortable with them being in the backgrounds. They are our Gentiles. Today in Israel, Palestinians are considered different as they demand justice in the face of racial segregation and brutal treatment at the hands of the government of Israel. And meanwhile, Jewish people who associate with them and stick up for them are considered different. They are treated like the Gentiles. Back in the civil rights era, white people who befriended black people and stuck up for them were treated like they were different. And even now, if you hang out with the crowd that looks like they're different, and you spell to be one of the folks who have privilege, you'll get treated like you're different. You become a Gentile. And then people who've formerly been incarcerated are considered different, often because of their previous convictions. Do you know that there are a couple of states in the Union where even if you satisfy your sentence and pay all your fines and pay all your fees, you still can't get your voting rights reinstated? Just a Gentile because of your past. The encounter Jesus had with Syrophoenician woman teaches that Gentiles will press their claims for divine justice on us. They can't afford to wait until we find it convenient to be agents of divine love and truth in their experiences. Those with gritty faith have to push and prod and agitate because they somehow believe and know that God's love is bigger and more real than human prejudice and our resentment. They are willing to have us get our attitude on in order for them to get God's grace on through us. They have more faith in God's grace than in our hate and our pain. And this woman is an example of the personal courage required of people who need help. She didn't allow her to despise gender because women were not favored in that time. She didn't allow her social status. She was probably more wealthy, and there was a little resentment, if not a lot of resentment towards people who are wealthy. You know how those of us who don't have much don't like it when folks who have a whole lot of stuff around us, we kind of get a little attitude. She didn't allow her ancestry to block her path to Jesus or her faith in God's love. She wasn't too proud to ask a Jewish man for help. She would not give up on God, and therefore she did not give up on Jesus. And like that woman, we must not give up on God. Like that woman, our faith must be tougher than the realities of prejudice and unbelief of our time. Like that woman, we must believe that God's love extends to everyone, regardless of religion, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation, ability, personal history, everything else. Like that woman, we who are considered Gentiles must continue pressing and pushing and agitating with gritty faith in God with those who have the power to make a divine difference that only God's divine grace and truth can make. And how are we who are followers of Jesus to live out this lesson? Like Jesus, we will also find ourselves inconvenienced by calls for help. This woman was an inconvenience. She just showed up where she wasn't invited, got in the face of a man who wanted to be left alone, and would not leave. She was an inconvenience. One might even call her a nuisance. We will often, like Jesus, find ourselves inconvenienced for cause we have. How many times have you not wanted to answer the phone? How many times, and now we have caller ID, you know. And now we have caller ID and we can see name on. Lord, I don't want to talk to. Don't want to talk to him. And because we have caller ID, usually with caller ID we have voicemail. So we not only have the identification of the person who's calling, we have a record of the call. They can leave their Gentile-like request. They can leave their Syrophoenician woman kind of request on our voicemail and say, call me. It's not like the old days where we can say, I wasn't at home. It's not like the old days where we can say, I was away from the phone. It's not like the old days where we can say, I didn't know you called. Now the Syrophoenician woman can find us. And who among us has not had the experience like Jesus where we really just did not want to be bothered? But look at the example of Jesus. He didn't want to be bothered. Sure didn't want anybody to know where he was. But she found him and wouldn't leave and wouldn't quit. I mean, don't you get annoyed when people keep calling after you don't answer the phone? I mean, they leave message after message after message, and you think, can't they get the hint? But isn't that the message we get from the example of this Syrophoenician woman? And look what Jesus teaches us. As followers of Jesus, we have to be prepared to deal with the persistent and insistent demands on us to be instruments of God's grace. Because people with gritty faith don't take no easily. They're not supposed to. People with gritty faith are supposed to keep calling. And isn't that the lesson we learn about prayer? Don't we read, pray without ceasing? Don't we read to be faithful and fervent in prayer? Should not we expect the same kind of grittiness in faith from the people who petition us to be agents of God's love that we read about in Scripture that God expects us to present? Not because God is hard-hearted, but because we have to be tenacious. Well, this is the lesson for us, and it is a lesson that we have to keep in mind. One aspect of this lesson is that we can't hide. Caller ID, call forwarding, call waiting, email, text, or just don't pick up the phone, we still can't hide. And we can't hide because we are morally and ethically obligated to hear those cries and to respond in God's name with help. We can't conceal ourselves from others who cry for help. We can't hide from people who are living with pain. Jesus is our example on how to respond with divine grace to the gritty faith calls for mercy we encounter from suffering people living with the label of otherness. Their pleas for mercy must appeal to the sense of prophetic mission within us. If we understand that we are on a mission from God as Jesus did, we cannot allow pride and prejudice or just our personal sense of convenience to stand between our suffering brothers and sisters and the help they need and the help we can give them. Another lesson we have to learn is that you and I are, as instruments of God's grace, magnets to people who are treated as Gentiles. Just like a moth flies toward light, people who are in pain are attracted to people who they sense have a sense of power to relieve their pain. The flame can't complain. Why does this moth keep flying at me? It is part of light to attract. People who are treated as Gentiles are drawn into our lives at every turn. Will we be like Jesus, responsive with divine mercy at their gritty faith? Will we allow their otherness, on the other hand, to limit our willingness to extend the blessings of God's grace to them? Will we allow the traditions and customs of our culture and our nationalities and our politics and our social status to become barriers to mercy for people who are somehow looked at as other? May the Spirit of God that empowered Jesus work in us and on us so that the Gentiles of our time and place experience the healing and the liberating and the powerful love of God. May the people of our time know that we are people who put ourselves in the way to be instruments of God's liberating and healing and powerful love. May we live so closely to the heart of God that we see hurting people with God's loving eyes, that we feel their pain with God's loving heart, and that we act in God's loving tenderness so that people and a world living with pain can, with gritty faith in God's love, experience divine mercy and healing. And then people with gritty faith will join Mrs. Cecil Frances Alexander and sing all things bright and beautiful, all things great and small, all things wise and wonderful. Our Father made them all and loves them all. May we live and love in the power of that gritty faith. Amen.